On today's show, the Nets put themselves in position for a win over the Hawks, but blow it with their most epic late-game collapse of the season. I'll tell you why the loss reflects poorly on Michael Porter Jr. and how Brooklyn's rookies need to learn from it on today's episode of Locked On Nets.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to Locked On Nets, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the number one sports podcast network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. The show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And on today's episode, I'm going to be recapping Brooklyn's 115-104 loss to the Atlanta Hawks on Sunday at State Farm Arena. And this was a game, Nets were coming off back-to-back blowout losses. They scored 84 points against the Cleveland Cavaliers, 85 points against the Oklahoma City Thunder, and they're going into a game with the Hawks that I thought was a fairly winnable game entering it, especially with Nick Claxton coming back from an injury. I thought that this was a game where the Nets were going to have a good chance to win against a Hawks team that had dropped 4 of 5, and it looked that way early on. I mean, the Nets did a lot of good things early in this game. Nolan and Egor looked really good early. Clax came back and made an immediate impact. MPJ was engaged and efficient offensively early on. But then came one of the most epic late-game offensive collapses I've seen in my 4 years on the beat covering this team full-time. And after the Nets, they were cold early shooting the ball. They caught a heater from 3, and they took a 102-91 lead with 8 minutes left in this game. And from that point, they're outscored 24-2 to close the game. 24-2 over the final 8 minutes of regulation. They shot 1 of 15 from the field with 5 turnovers. And this is why the Nets have struggled to win these games against other average to below average opponents over the last couple of months, because obviously they have a lot of rookies and they don't have a closer in these late game situations. And to me, that last line, that says something about Michael Porter Jr. in my opinion, because look, Egor and Nolan, they were really bad down the stretch tonight. I'll get to that. They handled the majority of the ball handling responsibilities and offensive, just overall duties down the stretch of this game. And that shouldn't be the case because MPJ is supposed to be the guy. Like, as bad as Egor and Nolan were, MPJ is supposed to be the guy. He's the highest paid player on the team. He was on the bubble for an all-star appearance this season. And as good as MPJ has been for much of this season, he just hasn't been an effective closer. You look at MPJ in the clutch, that's the final 5 minutes of games within 5 points. MPJ is 12 of 40 from the field, that's 30%. He's 4 of 26 from 3, that's 15.4%. And he has 2 assists and 4 turnovers. So he has just not been an effective closer in late game situations. And sure, he's been impactful offensively, obviously, for most of the season, has cooled off as of late. But when you get into these late game situations, some of the limitations that MPJ has skill set wise offensively really start to rear their heads, and they really start to be, accentuated by the ways that, defenses tighten up, the ways that defenses switch everything. Because you look at MPJ, a lot of his production is coming off, obviously, 3-point shooting, like just breakdowns or curling off things and being able to get open. Really tough shots sometimes when he's not open. And then these backdoor cuts, these slips, these high-low actions, and a lot of that stuff gets cut out. Like those easy buckets that you just get off of defensive lapses, defensive breakdowns, they get cut out down the stretch of the game. So that's really limited his 2-point impact. And then the 3-point shooting, obviously, you're glued to MPJ, these opposing teams, and they're switching everything, and they're making things really tough for him. And that's why down the stretch, you see these games, a lot of the time, it's ball handlers. It's guys who can create for themselves off the dribble and be those guys who can go out and get you a bucket. And MPJ's inability to do that is really the most glaring down the stretch of these tight games, because he's just not a natural ball handler, a natural self-creator. Like, he can do some things sometimes, working to some pull-ups. He can kind of bully his way down low sometimes. But overall, in terms of being like a quick first step guy, a twitchy guy, a guy who can create some stuff off the dribble, he just doesn't have the twitchiness. He doesn't have the ball handling ability to do some of that stuff. So that has made it really difficult for him to be effective during these closing situations. And it obviously must be said that it's not easy for MPJ because he doesn't have, a lot of guys around him in terms of proven scorers. He's playing with two rookies in Egor Demin and Nolan Traore, also Nick Claxton, and then Noah Clowney. Like, none of those guys are high-level scorers. So it makes it more difficult for him. But still, like, if you're supposed to be that top guy, like, this is some of the reason, in addition to his age not really matching the timeline and the injury history, that I'd be hesitant to give MPJ the huge contract extension that he's probably going to be looking for if I'm the Nets. Because MPJ is going to be eligible for a contract extension in July, and you look at it, some people have talked about him potentially getting a contract that's 4 years, pushing up over $150 million, over $40 million annually. And if I'm the Nets, I'd be really hesitant to do that. Unless you're getting some other like top guy that you're going to come in, like if you get into the Giannis sweepstakes somehow or something along those lines. Otherwise, besides that, I'd be really hesitant because I just don't think that MPJ matches the timeline. As good as he is and as good as a player as I think he can be moving forward, he does have some of these other limitations to his game where that's the reason why he might not be able to be a top one or a top two guy on a, contending level team. So I do think that this, these late game struggles, a collapse like this tonight, were kind of emblematic of some of the limitations that Michael Porter Jr. has. Then you look beyond MPJ because there were a lot of other Nets who were horrid down the stretch of this game. And, Egor Demin and Nolan Traore were two guys who looked really good early in this game. And I want to talk about some of the good things first. I mean, Egor has 13 points, 4 assists, 1 turnover, 5 of 11 from the field, and 2 of 5 from 3. And this was a really good game from Egor for 3 quarters. I thought this was one of Egor's more efficient and well-rounded performances of the season through 3 quarters because it wasn't just the three-point shooting. You saw him doing some other stuff. He had 4 assists and no turnovers through 3 quarters. He was facilitating. He was finding open shooters. He was pushing the ball. You look at the scoring. He got into the mid-range and took like a kind of a little bit of a push-up, push-off, step-back mid-range jumper in the first half. The second half, he has a drive where he's going to the basket, and he actually got kind of physical with, I forgot who was guarding him. It might have been Nickeil Alexander-Walker, but he drives to the basket. He gets down. He kind of has a little discard Euro layup. And that's something that like you're going to need to see from Egor moving forward because we've talked about his limitations as, obviously a self-creator, a driver, a ball handler. And Egor is not a bursty first step guy. He's not a quick twitch guy. So his way that he's going to be able to create advantages is using his size, his height, and then whatever strength he can put on. He doesn't have that strength, so it's been more difficult for him now. But a drive like that, it's only one play, but his ability to go downhill, get a little bit of a discard, go into somebody's chest, finish up at the rim, like that's something that you're going to want to see moving forward. And then defensively, he had some steals, he had a block. So good stuff from Egor. And then down the stretch of the game, it really, it tightened up and it became a lot more difficult for him, as it did Nolan Traore. You look at Nolan in this one, he had 11 points, 5 assists, 5 turnovers, 4 of 14 from the field, 1 of 3 from 3, 2 of 4 from the free throw line. But that stat line looked a lot better before the closing stretch of the game when the Nets got outscored 24-2. Because you look at Nolan, he did some really good things also early in this game. Like he was driving to the basket. He was, obviously facilitating like he has been. He was finishing at the rim, hitting some floaters, pushing the ball in transition, doing all those good things. And Nolan was actually a plus 23 at one point in this game. And he finished a plus 7 despite that closing stretch where the Nets were outscored, I think it was like 18-2 during Nolan's minutes down the stretch of the game. He still finished a plus 7. No other starters were a positive plus minus in this game. So Nolan was very effective for most of this game, and I think that is a major positive. But then down the stretch, like for Nolan and Egor, these are some of the rookie growing pains. Like this was a reason why I thought going into the season that the Nets were really going to have trouble competing against, really any level of team for a consistent basis or a consistent stretch because they just don't have the on-ball ball handlers down the stretch of the game who have that kind of experience. You're relying on guys like Egor Demin and Nolan Traore, and then alongside them, the most proven guy is MPJ, who's going to struggle in some of these clutch situations. But you look at Nolan down the stretch of this game, he was a little bit out of control. Like this is some of the stuff we've said with Nolan. He's a blur, one of the fastest players in the league. It's going to be about playing with control, playing with pace, playing with tempo. And we saw that kind of dissipate down the stretch in this one. He had a few bad shot selections. He had some turnovers down the stretch, and he was just a little bit out of control early on. And these are the rookie growing pains. Like you're going to see it with Nolan. You're going to see it with Egor. It was also defensively a little tough for Nolan because down the stretch of this game, the Hawks were just putting him in actions. They were having his man screen for Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson was getting switches onto Nolan. He was getting the ball in the mid post, and he was kind of just bullying his way down. So that was a little bit tough. Obviously, Nolan has some good size and length. He's going to need to add a little bit more size and mass, weight and strength as his career progresses. And, you got a quote from Jordy about it after the game. He was asked about Nolan's late game struggles, and he said, you go through the experience and you learn from it, some of the rush shots and turnovers, but you got to learn, and you got to learn how to be composed. You got to learn how to put everyone in place and take good shots. We just didn't today, so next game it is, end quote. So I think that's pretty fair, and that's what you're looking for from Nolan, from Egor. These are rookie growing pains. I think there were a lot of good things early in this game, and down the stretch, they struggled, as you're going to expect rookies to struggle sometimes, and MPJ was not able to pick up the slack. But while this was a very epic collapse and tough to watch down the stretch, I'm sure, for Nets fans, they came away with a loss, and they now are in great position in regard to the tank race. But this was a game that the Nets did look like, after having made some progress, that they had a really good chance to win, and it could have undone some of that progress. And I do think the Nets were somewhat playing with fire in this game. So why was that? What do I think Nets fans should be looking for in that regard moving forward? I'll get into all that when I continue Locked On Nets after a quick break. Shoot your shot on PrizePicks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. That's right. PrizePicks is giving you $50 in lineups when you sign up and play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks makes every dunk, every dime, and every board that much more exciting. It's America's #1 app for sports picks. PrizePicks is simple to play. You just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and if your picks are right, you cash in. You can choose from basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, UFC, and more. Plus, they've got features like early payouts and flex play, so you've got options while the games are still happening. Guys, you'll download the app, and you'll be surprised how easy it is to get started. It'll take just a couple of minutes to build your first lineup. You can make NBA lineups around players you already follow, picking more or less on points and assists, and it honestly makes every possession way more fun to watch. And it's available in all 50 states, so it's easy for just about anyone to jump in. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. It's good to be right. Coming back from the break, continuing today's Locked On Nets episode following Brooklyn's loss to the Hawks in Atlanta. And this is a loss that was tough down the stretch for the Nets, obviously. They had an epic collapse. 24-2, they were outscored over the final 8 minutes. But despite that, it is a loss. And as difficult as losses can be for fans, I'm sure, the Nets have a goal, of tanking and of losing. And, I'll talk about the way that they went about it in this game, how I think that they were somewhat playing with fire. But first, just to check in on where they sit in the lottery standings after this game. The Nets are in pretty great position right now in regard to the draft lottery standings, because the Pelicans actually beat the 76ers on Saturday night. So following that, and also the Wizards had 2 straight wins over the Indiana Pacers. Following those outcomes and tonight's loss, the Nets' last 3 losses, they are now in sole possession of 3rd place in the draft lottery standings. So they have that 3rd spot. Have 1 fewer win than the Pelicans, and they have 1 fewer loss. So they're both 4 games back, but in terms of winning percentage, they're in 3rd place. And they're only a half game back of the Indiana Pacers right now. And they're really almost tied. They both have 15 wins, the Nets and the Pacers, and they're 1 behind the Pacers in the loss column. So they're only a half game back of 2nd place in the draft lottery standings. And things had looked really dicey early this season after they had that 7-3 stretch in December. You wondered if they were going to be able to get back up into this kind of position. And now they're only a half game back of 2nd. And as it stands with the Nets right now being in the top 3, they're obviously tied in regard to the probabilities for the #1 pick. The 1, 2, and 3 spots all have a 14% chance of #1 overall. So if the season ended today, the Nets would have as good a chance as any other team of landing the #1 pick. They also have a 52.1% chance of being in the top 4. So they have as good chance of any other team of being in the top 4. And then their floor right now, the lowest that the Nets could fall in the draft is the 7th pick. And that would only have a 7% chance of happening. So they would have a 93% chance of being in the top 3 picks, a 52% chance of being in the top 4, and a 14% chance of being #1. Those are good odds. Those are really good odds. And especially in a draft where you obviously have the top 3, 4 that separated itself, and then you have a couple of other guys in Michael Brown Jr. and Kingston Flemings who have looked really good, potentially being in those 5th and 6th spots. this would be a really good position for the Nets to be in. And look, they're still going to have their work cut out for them because you look at it, the Pacers are tanking extremely hard. It's going to be tough to get ahead of them. I don't think that it's out of the question, but it's going to be tough. You have the Pelicans, who I think the Nets should be able to finish ahead of because New Orleans doesn't have any incentive to tank. And then you have the Wizards, who owe their pick top 8 protected to the Knicks. So they're going to be tanking really hard. So it's going to be the Nets, I think, competing for, these 2, 3, 4 spots with probably the Pacers and the Wizards. We'll see how the Pelicans can do. But they're going to have their work cut out for them to stay in this position, if not gain even a spot higher to that number 2 spot. And they're not showing, as much urgency, as much as they've lost, as much as they've done. They have yet to match the urgency level of a team like the Pacers or a team like the Wizards. And I think that tonight's game was kind of representative of that because they played everybody in this game tonight against a Hawks team that had lost 4 of 5 games. And particularly Nick Claxton playing in this game, I think that was an interesting decision because Clax just supposedly had injured his ankle. The Nets said that he had injured his ankle during practice on Wednesday, and he obviously missed the back-to-back against the Cavaliers and the Thunder on Thursday and Friday. And you're, the final game of a 3-game road trip right now against a Hawks team that had lost 4 of 5, has not been at all playing well. This is a very winnable game if the Nets are at full strength, as showed. Why is Nick Claxton coming back for the final game of a road trip against a Hawks team that had just lost 4 of 5 if you're trying to tank? I thought that was a really curious decision. And look, Clax looked healthy. He looked good enough to play. But I spoke about this on one of my prior pods of the urgency that these other tanking teams are showing. The Nets are going to have to do some stuff to match that. And sure, they came away with a loss here. They very easily could have won that game. They were up 11 with 8 minutes remaining. They collapsed, obviously, in epic fashion offensively, but they easily could have won that game. That game looked like it was going to be a win. And Clax playing in this game, he came out and he made an immediate impact. You look at what Nick Claxton did in this game, he had, especially in the first half, he was a big reason that the Nets were tight in this one. And you look for the game, he finishes with 15 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 turnover, a steal. He was an effective player overall. Obviously, he didn't make much of an impact down the stretch of this game, but having Nick and having Day'Ron and having those guys for 48 minutes of second play, that is a floor raiser. I've spoken about that over these last few pods when I spoke about, Nick Claxton's absence. And I think that if you have a guy with any kind of injury, you're going to want to hold him out as long as you can and make sure that he's back to 1,000%. And maybe Nick was back to 1,000% in this game, but I just think it's an interesting decision. If you're tanking, which the Nets are tanking, there's no doubt about it that they're tanking. I know some fans, when they don't do some of the stuff that fans might want them to, might bring it into question whether they're tanking. They're tanking. They're just not tanking as hard as some of these other teams. And Clax playing in this game was kind of emblematic of that. And I think that it was definitely an interesting decision to have him play and then to have him and MPJ play, because you look at it, MPJ just played 38 minutes during his first back-to-back in over 2 months, almost 3 months. MPJ played against the Cavaliers and against the Thunder. That was the first time he had played a back-to-back in nearly 3 months, and he played 38 minutes during the second game against the Thunder. So why are him and Clax both available for this game, and why is MPJ playing 35 minutes? To me, having MPJ and Clax available and having them play as much as they did in this game, I think that that's playing with fire, in my opinion. I think that that's pretty obvious by the fact that they almost won this game and they almost undid some of the progress that they did, in regard to being up to that third spot and having sole possession of that third spot. And look, there might be some Nets fans listening or watching this right now who are rolling their eyes. And look, I understand that there's value in some wins. You can't lose every game, but there isn't really much value, in my opinion, to kind of half-assing this tank. And if you have an opportunity against a team like the Hawks where you think you're going to have a decent chance to win, which the Nets did, it's a pretty easy step to take not to bring Nick Claxton back from an ankle injury to travel and play the final game of a 3-game road trip. And we'll see how the Nets operate with this moving forward, but they now have another even more winnable game against the Dallas Mavericks on Tuesday at Barclays Center if they're able to play that game with the storm, the blizzard that's coming in. But maybe, Nick Claxton and MPJ both playing in this game, maybe that was a precursor to the Nets sitting them in that game against Dallas. I would be surprised if the Nets were at full strength and everybody is playing against that Dallas team that is without Cooper Flagg right now and is obviously kind of soft tanking. So we'll see how they handle that. But games like this, where the Nets are playing, near 500 or just below 500 teams who are not playing well as of late, and you go in with playing all of your guys, we've seen it. The Nets are good enough to hang in these games and to potentially win these games. So I do think they were playing with fire a little bit in this one, but despite that, they come away with a loss, and they're in really good position in the draft lottery standings. But as the season progresses, if you want to give yourself the best chance of staying in that really good position, you're going to have to do some things more than the Nets have been doing. So how do they handle that moving forward will definitely be one of the main storylines for the rest of the season. Closing this out, just want to talk about a few of the other Nets performances, some of the rookies, Drake Powell and Danny Wolf. Also, what we did see from Nick Claxton coming back and Day'Ron Sharpe playing. So we'll get into all that when I close out Locked On Nets after a quick break. Guys, ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win a trip to the finals for two. That's right. Flights, tickets, the whole experience. Guys, if you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock in. You'll love futures this time of year, whether it's picking a team to win the championship or grab a conference title. It adds an extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Guys, tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Coming back from the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode following Brooklyn's loss to the Atlanta Hawks. And just want to talk about a few of the other performances that we got in this game. I want to start with the two other rookies who played in this one, and that is obviously Danny Wolf and Drake Powell. And, Danny and Drake didn't play that much in this one. They played, Danny played 18 and a half minutes. Drake played almost 14 minutes. So not that much from those guys. And I do think that, it's a little curious that, especially a guy like Drake, that he only played 14 minutes in this one. You look at it, he did some, good things. He had some nice flashes early in this, and he finishes with 7 points on 2 of 5 shooting from the field and 1 of 2 from 3. He was a minus 20, which was a team worst. So the Nets did struggle with him on the court. But you look at it overall, he had a couple plays early in this game that I thought were really impressive flashes. He had one play where he got the ball at the top of the key. The Nets initiated a pick and roll with him, and he drove left, kind of blew by somebody, went downhill, got met at the rim by, I think it was Jock Landale, and he went up on his left side, went under the rim, and finished with like a corkscrew up and under right-handed layup with a little bit of English and spun it off the glass and in. And I was like, damn. That was a really impressive drive and finish. He had another play where he got the ball with 3 seconds left late in the shot clock on the right wing. He had Landale guarding him, I think, and he took kind of like a crossover step back three, drained it late in the shot clock. Overall, Drake, I think it's been up and down for him. I think he's a guy that obviously has a long way to go offensively in terms of being able to do some of the things that you need to do to be a consistent contributor. But you do see the flashes. Like, you see this late shot clock shot making. You see these drives and lay-ins where he looks really athletic and gathered and coordinated finishing around the rim. You obviously have seen the mid-range flashes. So I think with Drake, you want to see the workload expand a little bit. Like, the minutes have stayed a little bit restrained. And look, he was a minus 20 in this one, so maybe that played a role in Jordan Fernandez only playing him 14 minutes. We've said it, this is a tanking season. Rookie development should be the main thing. You look at it in this one, Terrence Mann plays more than him. The starters, all of those guys play huge minutes, and Drake's only on the bench getting 14 minutes. Ochai Agbaji played more minutes than Drake, only slightly, but still, that shouldn't be the case. I think Drake should be getting a little bit more time. And then Danny Wolf finishes with 5 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 turnover. He was 2 of 4 from the field and 1 of 3 from 3. So nothing crazy from Danny in this one, but an efficient performance overall. I think that he did have, he had a big 3 in the fourth quarter that extended the Nets lead to that 103-92 lead, the biggest lead they had. That was a 3 that Danny hit. I think he looked okay defensively. He was a +8 in this one. That was a team high. So not a bad performance from Danny. And then the last 2 guys I want to touch on quickly are Nick Claxton and Day'Ron Sharpe, because Nick did have the ankle injury. And obviously, he didn't play in those last 2 games. I was a little surprised that he came back for this one, but he did look healthy. As I said, 15 points, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 1 turnover, 6 of 11 from the field, 3 of 5 from the free throw line. He looked, springy. He looked active. He looked athletic. And I think that it was a good overall performance from Nick. And then Day'Ron Sharpe, same thing. Like, Jock Landale played really well. This is the second game this season that Jock Landale has played a significant role in a Nets loss. He did it once with the Grizzlies a couple of months back, and then he played really well again tonight. So it was a pretty, even matchup, I'd say, with him and Day'Ron Sharpe. Like, he hit some threes, which is going to be tough for any of the Nets centers, especially Day'Ron, to get out on the perimeter and guard three-point shooter with some of the ways that the Nets structure their defensive coverages. But Day'Ron finishes with 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 turnovers, 4 of 6 from the field, 3 of 4 from the free throw line. So you want to clean up the turnovers, but overall, I think that Day'Ron was active. He had a couple of layups rim out, so he could have been even more efficient from the field. But I think that you see it, that when the Nets are getting 48 minutes of efficient center play from Nick and Day'Ron, it's a floor raiser for this team. And I think that you saw that in this game, and how the Nets manage that moving forward with their tanking agenda will definitely be something to watch. But that's all I got for you guys on today's episode of Locked On Nets. If you guys do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you enjoy my content, take a second right now, smash that like button, leave a comment, leave a 5-star review. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. And that's got one day off, and they're back in action on Tuesday against the Dallas Mavericks in a game that will have big tank implications. So I'll have coverage of all that and more when I'm back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.